You know what really grinds my gears? When the premise of the show is better than the actual show. I've mentioned before, I would have preferred The X Files if it focused more on aliens and less on government conspiracies. Sword Art Online started as people trapped in an online game, with death in the game meaning death in real life. Then it devolved into a harem anime. They even kept going after the first death game to play other games, and had the main character survive an assassination attempt outside of the game, even with his extremely atrophied muscles. Ever notice how, in the early seasons of Game of Thrones, no character was safe? But by the last two or three seasons, there were definitely a bunch of characters you knew were going to live through this. Even death couldn't stop Jon Snow. They should have let Daenerys die in the desert, have the dragons fly north in an almost directionless rage by themselves after burning down the army that betrayed her and the city she tried to attack. The White Walkers should not have allowed Jon and his allies to escape on the water. The Hound should have died when Arya left him for dead. Tyrion should have died after he killed his father. The disease should have killed Jorah Mormont. Jaime should have died fighting the bear to save Brienne of Tarth. Someone serving the High Sparrow should have killed Varys. Bran the Broken should have died when the Night King attacked Winterfell. The show should have stayed with its roots, having a head plunked down on a table in front of an overconfident ruler thousands of miles away from the front lines. Naruto's premise is an incompetent orphan ninja with magic fighting to be recognized and survive. By the end of Shippuden, that same character is a reincarnation of a god fighting aliens and single-handedly overpowering all the armies of every country all at once. I would have liked it if they didn't do a bunch of power scaling. If each character had their special skill, and they had to use teamwork and strategy to beat their opponents instead of just concentrating really hard until they become stronger. When I first heard about Goblin Slayer, I was excited to see an overpowered warrior slaughtering thousands of defenseless enemies. Maybe he would even cower before the other creatures. Maybe he was going to grow old trying to kill every goblin in the country. But even before the first episode ended, they rejected my expectations. Goblins aren't weak. They're one of the most dangerous enemies in the world. The characters talk as if people don't respect the threat, but almost every character they meet in the show does fear goblins. I would much prefer a version of the show where what they tell us about the world agrees with what they later show us about the world. If there's an army of goblins about to attack the village, and you've spent the past few episodes talking about how no one respects the Goblin Slayer because goblins are so weak, then no one should have joined him to defend the town. It would have been nice to see the Goblin Slayer have to deal with being forced to retreat, finally tasting defeat. Afterwards, he'd know that the townsfolk are all dead and he could bombard the town from a distance, or quarantine it, or some other interesting strategy to try and kill all the goblins without having any of them survive to learn the lesson. Harry Potter, a wizard in the modern world of cars and telephones, with a secret society of wizards living just under everyone's noses. That's an interesting premise. But then JK had to ruin it by making the main character a knockoff Jesus, with love being more powerful than magic. The wizard adults are all incompetent, and their society functions exactly like ours, with 9 to 5 jobs, poor people being looked down on, racism based on muggle blood, slavery of house elves, and newspapers with moving pictures. Ooh, so futuristic. Like when the Jetsons get their paper delivered in a tube. The sheer lack of imagination on how magic would change society. Why do banks need to exist in a wizard world where you can transmute objects into other objects? What's stopping any random 10-year-old from transforming all the gold in Green Gods into chocolate? Why do they bother with locks when everyone knows an unlocking spell? They can passively maintain illusion spells to have the roof transparent and hover candles around, but they can't detect a bus sized snake going through their pipes. Why does everyone make such a big deal about Voldemort? Some serial killer from 50 years ago that killed a dozen people using something less powerful than the guns which existed at the time? They have a closed loop time travel system, and they give it to a child so she can overwork herself and burn herself out, not to mention aging almost twice as much as her classmates that year. Death Note would have been much better if Light didn't care about getting caught. At the beginning, he was treating the book like a science experiment. He didn't really care about the power, he just wanted to see if the book worked. And criminals made good test subjects. He didn't really plan to rid the world of criminals, he just hadn't thought it through. You probably wouldn't put too much thought into rubbing a magic lamp. You might even jokingly make a wish before activating the lamp. If the writers weren't so nationalistic, then Light might have tried executing international war criminals, rather than just the people in his local jail or in his local news. Or if this was meant to be the story of a bumbling moron who gets a weapon of mass destruction, then they should have characterized him more clearly, instead of having everyone around him treat him like some sort of genius while he makes incredibly dumb choices. Beastars is a show on Netflix about a society of humanoid animals of different species. The main premise is the carnivores struggle to not eat the herbivores. They add in the complexity of the main cast being teenagers, and a handful of them don't understand the line between hunger and lust. Then it goes off the rails. There's only one security guard at this boarding school where hundreds or possibly thousands of teenagers live year round. And despite it being really obvious who the murderer is, no one ever calls the police. Legoshi doesn't because he's an idiot. Louis doesn't because he's a drama queen. The security guard doesn't because she might as well be a ghost after never speaking to anyone other than Legoshi over the course of 2 years. Pina doesn't, despite being the new kid and having no reason to stay involved in the life or death struggle. The mayor doesn't do anything about it because he's working for a mafia gang. None of the teachers or police even investigate the crime scene. What about the Beastar? Kind of like their version of Batman, but with a license to beat up and kill criminals. Despite frequently investigating crimes and conspiracies, he doesn't get involved with this one. Okay, spoiler alert if you haven't seen the show. 3, 2, 1. Okay, the killer is the largest carnivore in the drama club. The only one with hands large enough to make the dents in the door at the memorial, and later on, the only one tall enough and strong enough to beat up Legoshi. You don't even need me to tell you the species, gender, or name of the killer. That's how obvious it is. It would have been cool to see how this society functions with adults actually capable of taking actions instead of only existing when a teenager decides to talk to them. I'll leave it there. Maybe another time and I can go into Star Wars, Doctor Who, or more of the dozens of anime series I've seen.